my mousetrap. All I wanna do is convince you with my cheese. All I wanna do is be the coolest cat here, but I'll need some more super greed. Spend a lot of extra time waiting for the acolyte. I am gonna catch that fool. You will think I'm really cool. All I wanna do is impress you with my mousetrap. All I wanna do is convince you with my cheese. All I wanna do is be the coolest cat here, but I'll need some more super greed. Just watch me, mouse. Just watch me catch you. Just watch me, mouse. Just watch me catch you, catch you, catch you. All I wanna do is impress you with my mousetrap. All I wanna do is convince you with my cheese. All I wanna do is be the coolest cat here, but I'll need some more super greed. Oh, but I need some more super greed. Oh, but I need some more super greed.
Hello, MouseHunt. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you happen to be in the world. Today is October 16, 2020. Welcome to Feedback Friday. My name is Dave. Hello to everybody in the chat. How's everybody doing today? Looks like we have about 70 people with us right now. Hello, Anders, KDM, Schmick, Aaron, Kyle, Arctic, In59, Ray, hello, Peter. Well, hello, everybody. Today, actually, first I should thank Jacob for taking the steering wheel on Feedback Friday for a number of times in a row there. He was holding down the fort for some time there while I was a little bit swamped, and one Friday in there, actually, too, I had taken the Friday off as well. So big thanks to Jacob for holding down the fort for a while there. Grant says, doing good. Happy late Thanksgiving. Well, thank you. Yes, that was kind of nice. Had a little long weekend, actually. That was the weekend I took the Friday off to have a few days off in a row. It was a little bit of a different holiday than usual, as I'm sure many of us have kind of experienced so far this year, but kind of made the best of things. Schmick says, Jacob has been doing great, some great vids. Yeah, I kind of put him on in the background. Even my home office here, I have a TV with a Chromecast, and so I'd often put him just kind of on low volume in the background so I could kind of check out what he's illustrating as he goes along there. And he's put together some cool stuff for sure. Well, today is a little bit of a Feedback Friday on Feedback Friday. We've done this before every now and then, and it's kind of a nice feedback topic. Touch base with players now and then and get a sense of, what do you enjoy about Feedback Friday? What do you want us to do more of? What would you like to see us do less of? Kind of from my perspective, anyway, I can't speak on behalf of Jacob, but I know kind of what I get out of it a lot is I'm looking for general kind of sentiment or mood amongst players, because obviously it's just, not the whole player base tunes in and joins us, and that would be a little unruly to have everyone in a live chat room like that. But it is kind of nice in that you get a sense of, okay, what are players excited about? What are they less excited about? Sometimes it raises some interesting questions that we can walk away and then go, okay, well, let's look into that a little bit more, or let's try to collect the feedback on that in some different way. So I jotted down a few things that kind of typically come up on Feedback Fridays, kind of get the conversation started. One is often feedback suggestions on recent releases. So often, especially when something just kind of came out or started, getting feedback on that update. especially with kind of new permanent areas. We got in the habit for a little while of releasing treasure maps slightly after the area came out. And it was a good chance to incorporate a little bit of player feedback, fine tune things here and there. Brian says major feedback Friday is probably timing for those in Asia, Oceania. Literally starts past midnight. Alternating start times might help. Yeah, that's fair enough. That might be a tough one for us. I mean, that's that's the state of time zones in general. The morning is kind of a good time for us to kind of do things on from our end anyway. It's kind of tough to schedule it later in the evenings. I could see potentially starting earlier. I don't know how Jacob would feel about that, but when it's my turn, I kind of start my work days usually around 7:30, 8 o'clock, or 8 o'clock, I'd say, give or take a half hour. So even getting started like 2 hours earlier. That's also, too, the routine is kind of easy to remember as well. So, yeah, it's kind of a complex thing to think through. Daniel says, don't like art, always skip it. Well, I think you're missing out a little bit there. It's kind of a neat opportunity as well to have a little bit of influence on the piece that Jacob is putting together. But yeah, I can see how different things are in everyone's cup of tea. I always like to kind of put it on, even if I don't watch it live, I'll put it on and maybe put it on like or 2.5, 3 times speed or something while I'm doing something else, and kind of almost like a time lapse of seeing Jacob put together a piece. It always kind of blows me away at just kind of the process and how a blank canvas just turns into this amazing piece of art is always inspiring. Von Bam says maps for, and I've already lost track of the chat. Maps for Valor Rift would be great. Thanks for adding Halloween maps this year. Yeah, they were in by popular demand. The Halloween event was a little tricky to get maps put together, but that said, I think Franco did a good job of putting those together for the Halloween event. The gameplay is a bit different there in that you're not, you spend a significant portion of time not hunting the event mice, so it's a little tricky to put those together, and so they're a nice little boost while you're in that cannonball farming phase anyway. Ryan says 1 hour or two earlier actually might help. All right, that might be good. Maybe try that out on a bit of a trial basis, start a little bit sooner. We could also try it at the end of the day as well. That might be kind of an interesting experiment as well. Try it at 3 p.m., 4 p.m. our time. That would be, I think, about 12 hours difference. Yeah, well, no, that might be too early then. Yeah, it's tricky. Stejan says, would it be possible to create some secondary part of Feedback Friday on the forums, Facebook, groups, Discord server, where people can drop some questions as well? Stuff can easily get buried here. Yeah, that's a good suggestion as well. Kind of in the last point I put there, player mailbag / question and answer. Now, one of the challenges there is answering 30 questions in 30 minutes or whatever the pace is. That's a pretty quick pace, and so there's bound to be a little bit of misinformation or an incorrect answer here or there. So one thing we've been thinking about along that lines is trying to put together a player mailbag without it being, also we don't want it to turn into hours and hours of kind of organizational kind of filtering work, so trying to find that good balance there. But even kind of Michelle's been experimenting with going to all the kind of larger groups or kind of community spots where hunters gather and trying to put together kind of the leaders of those different communities or the organizers of those communities, and that might kind of help create that more sort of little bit of a tiered structure where it's not super overwhelming, but everyone kind of helps out a little bit to put together an interesting mailbag. And then getting that a little bit of ahead of time, that would just afford a little bit more time to make sure that the answers to those are kind of well thought out, or they're kind of been validated, or you can get kind of read between the lines, add some context. Grant says, how about a special Feedback Friday once or twice a year that is for the Asia time zones, and just special schedule it? Yeah, it might be kind of fun to try out as well. It would even shake up our routine a little bit, just doing it at a kind of completely different time. Yeah, Ryan says, end of day would be awful timing for us, 3 a.m. in Singapore. Yeah, it would have to be kind of late our time, so it would kind of involve somebody kind of working past normal office hours to put something together. And that is a challenge. Time zones are a big challenge. I know even working with Cherry Credits has produced some interesting kind of business challenges or business communication challenges, in that maybe there's an issue or there's something we need resolved. And quite frequently, we'd have this window in the morning. I was like, okay, I think we're both online at the same time. But then after that, it would be, okay, if we send off an email, we're going to hear back tomorrow morning. And by the time we reply, we will hear back the next morning. So kind of, communication always lags by 24 hours in a way. Swift asks, oh yeah, what's with the gift of the day changing sometime midday? Basically, the gift system needs quite the thorough overhaul. In a game that is 13 years old, we definitely have our fair share of technical debt, and there are definitely a few systems in the game that somebody basically needs to sit down for probably 3-4 weeks and reinvent that wheel and overhaul it to make it more, modernize it, bring it up to date. Definitely there's some challenges in some of the foundation of the game was built 13 years ago. Portions of it written while we were fresh out of college, never made anything very complex before. And I'd like to think that over the course of 13 years, we've honed our craft and become better at it. So when we look back on decisions made over a decade ago, it's like, well, we probably make different decisions now. So it's a challenge there. And it's always another challenge of juggling priorities, resources, and where we put our time into kind of what we pay attention to. Tim says, if you could submit polls for everyone to answer, that would help get a lot quicker feedback view. That'd be interesting as well. If we could kind of streamline some sort of polling system, if we had a particular topic on Feedback Friday that was something that would be well suited to that, to kind of hit everybody at once. Like I said, for me, I often kind of take it as a way of feeling sort of the pulse. I don't necessarily use it as like, okay, this is a concrete way to walk away and make decisions or form conclusions. More, it's kind of a way to raise some questions and then look for things, like he suggested, like polls or something. It's like, well, we're really not sure. It seems like there might be an issue here, or there might be an idea here that is worth pursuing, but hey, how can we then validate that in some other way? So Scrib says, I like the collaboration with the community. I know it's not going anywhere, but it's something I really appreciate from this game. That's great to hear. Stejan says, player mailbag. Could it be interesting to let people send in questions, give others the option to upvote, like, react to them, and go over the most popular questions? That's kind of a neat way as well to take care of that sort of curation challenge, right? And especially, too, there's also kind of almost like a backlog issue, or there might be something, well, if that was a question that has recently been answered, how long do we wait and before that kind of gets back at the top of the mailbag? So it's more complex than it seems when you try to go about it. It was something we did years ago, and it would, I guess over the course of months, it started to kind of show some of its cracks here and there in terms of how well it worked or how well streamlined. People would be like, well, this question again? But that's also not fair to someone who's never heard the answer to that question before. But also then to go back and like, well, here's 200 questions from last year. Please read every single one and every answer before you submit anything to a mailbag is a little bit daunting as well, and not very welcoming. Nikki says, I've come back after a long hiatus and I'm super impressed with the developments. You guys are great. Well, that's fantastic to hear. Alan says, would like to see the journal revert to how it was so we could see where our teammates were hunting at a glance. Yeah, we've kind of passed that feedback along as well. It's kind of surfaced here and there. Jen Aces says, hi Dave, can you make catch that we share at Facebook show the image of the mouse instead of the link? Maybe can attract new potential player. For sure, the kind of the sharing system as well. It's another one of those things that needs pretty much a complete overhaul. Tim Yee said, would it be possible to provide us with a long-term roadmap? Yeah, that's an interesting thing as well. We could almost add it to the list of things that do come up on Feedback Friday for sure, in terms of seeing kind of previous, what we're currently working on. Kind of it for us too. That's something else that I get out of it, and I bring back to the team as well. Is it's a unique opportunity to get feedback on something before we've even released it. If we do a little bit of a sneak peek, a preview, maybe we show some aspects like, okay, we're not quite sure which direction to push this in, and it's interesting to see different responses, comments from the chat that can kind of help influence. Okay, where do we push that, or at least raise some different questions to walk away, ask ourselves, approach playtesting a little differently, and kind of not that it's the end and be all of the process, but it's kind of one of the tools in the toolbox there. Samuel says, make corkboards reliable. Indeed, that is yet another thing that is, I think that was created close to 7 years ago at least. It predates our Toronto office and basically needs to be redone from scratch. And that is kind of the ongoing challenge. I won't call it frustration, but the ongoing challenge that we manage with such a small team, but with such a large project, is what do we work on? And sometimes there isn't enough time to work on everything we would like to. Stephanie says, I have been gone for a few years. It seems a lot has changed. It would be nice to have a section for returning players, help them catch up on all the changes. Yeah, that's interesting. One thing I would recommend is the adventure book is kind of a nice starting point as well. You get a kind of high-level overview of everything that you may have missed or you have yet to complete in the game. There's definitely still some questions of strategy, and depending on how you approach the game, whether you're more of a completionist and you want to go about and just experience everything in its fullest, if you're more of kind of very more specific achievement based, and you're like, well, this is what I want to accomplish, and I want to find the quickest path to get there. I know a lot of players kind of form their strategies around that. Certainly in MouseHunt, there are many resources in MouseHunt, but throughout the game's history, the most valuable resource you have is time. You can only take 5 hunts an hour with your trap check and 4 horn calls there, so time is your most valuable resource. So it kind of makes sense for a lot of people, a lot of players. They try to think, well, how can I make the best use out of that very limited resource of time? As it says, some guy in YouTube, provide an outside link for people to submit questions before and during the stream. Make your life easier trying to follow up on the millions of comments. Yeah, for sure. Some way of organizing a mailbag. There's other, it presents, like I've touched on, it presents other unique challenges, but it's kind of something that we're mulling over, and it's interesting to get player impressions and comments and feedback on that. Chong says, would it be possible for the Golden Jade map to be able to be worked by people of a lower rank than Knight? It was, I think, if I recall correctly, and this is a good example of answering something right off the top of my head, and I could say completely a different thing that if I had 5 minutes to look into it, but I suspect that there weren't quite a large enough variety of a mice or to kind of balance out the challenge versus reward there. It doesn't take too long to get to Knight, so it just might be a map that is geared more towards mid to endgame players. Spigar says, I think a general roadmap is good. This year's one release kind of hurts when you don't know how big Floating Islands is going to be. Yeah, for sure, fair enough. We kind of have our roadmap established for event season, and I think that would be fairly predictable for anyone familiar with event season. Right now, we are wrapping up kind of our second batch of Floating Islands follow-up updates, or kind of a patch to the Floating Islands. Kind of primarily a lot of interface tweaks and changes, just kind of small changes, improvements, with the goal of providing better feedback on the cycle of capturing 4 wardens to do a high altitude, and then that cycle resetting. There's a little initial confusion there. I think that was smoothed out now, or people got past that learning curve. But for new players coming into the area, that would be nice for sure, as well as a little more feedback on treasure troves and how and when they're rewarded. That too, just kind of going over feedback was something that wasn't entirely clear, because you don't know what's going to happen until it does. Then you only see it in the journal. So we've added that. It is underneath where you see the ward and the paragon, or like the enemy icon on the right side of that progress bar. After you've captured the warden or the paragon, the trove appears there, and it kind of encourages you or reminds you, hey, if you finish fully exploring the island, you'll earn a trove. It's also a nice little reminder that maybe there's some in your inventory. We struggled a little bit because there's already a lot going on the HUD. We didn't want it to be information overload, but to incorporate the troves on the HUD themselves so you could open them from there. But it got a little too cluttered, so it was a difficult one to find the right balance for. Toby asks, can we manually turn off the daily draw? For sure. I mean, we could get a running list going of sort of, I wouldn't say archaic, but technical debt features that need to be overhauled. The ballot or daily draw system is right up there. It is quite ancient and crufty. If you're kind of in programming, often when you get into large scale projects, unfortunately, sometimes there's areas of the code is like, oh, that part's a little. If you're going into that part, be careful because it's brittle. It's easy to break. And it's a good sign of like, okay, well, we got to go and spend some time fixing that up. But again, kind of our challenge is small team, huge project. And so we have to pick our battles very wisely. But Feedback Friday, on the topic of, what would you like to get from Feedback Friday? Reading those types of suggestions and kind of just getting, like I said, a general sentiment, right? You can kind of, from my perspective, get kind of a vague sense of like, okay, well, this is starting to become a little bit of an issue for players because it keeps coming up on Feedback Friday. And then we check, maybe we're on the Discord and we see, okay, well, this comes up on the Discord a little bit. And then we're on a Facebook, on the Facebook fan page. And I go, well, every once in a while that comes up on a comment. That's a little subjective, but it kind of helps keep it up in our memory banks a little bit. So as we juggle our backlog and kind of shift around priorities, it can kind of play a role in helping, okay, well, let's move this one up and this one down a little bit. Chip Murky says, have you ever thought of a haunted maze like Labyrinth for Halloween as an event in the future? We did at one point have the Cord Maze and Haunted House, and that was kind of a neat theme. We'll see as well. Again, it's kind of time permitting, but it would be nice to maybe mix up the Halloween event next year. I know a couple people on the team kind of pitched different ideas based on some kind of suggestions they saw from players or inspiration that they had. And so it'd be nice if we kind of had time to put together a little bit of a revamp again. There's definitely some nostalgia notes, I think, to hit with the trick-or-treating to profiles. I know I missed that a little bit. I had fun doing that. Yonel asks, what's the reason behind why does the daily gift change one day? Yeah, we touched on that a little bit earlier. It's unfortunately a system that needs an overhaul to really reliably fix that. And so, yeah, it's a difficult choice. And it's kind of, these are the challenges that we routinely face maintaining the game is, do we kind of put somebody on that for 3-4 weeks? And then what does that mean for the other projects that we're working on? And then kind of finding the right time though, where we can address that without it affecting something else. The event season is particularly challenging in that obviously we can't release the Halloween event in November. And so those are very unflexible timelines they give us. Or not that they get, the events give us, or just the nature of events. And so it's difficult sometimes to kind of piece that together and say, okay, well, let's spend 3 weeks on this and then we'll get to the Halloween event. But oops, Halloween came out in November, December. That doesn't make sense. So it can be tricky. The Very Best says, maybe you can do a Feedback Friday before an area or event is launched. Get some info before the start. For example, how I get the dirigible skins in floating islands. Yeah, I think that's something we do every now and then. So it's kind of nice to read that that's something that you're interested in as well. I know we kind of did that before the floating islands, probably even before Valor Rift. I think we did a couple kind of extensive ones. It was a nice way to get initial player response, impressions. The questions that we see in the chat are usually a good signal to kind of give us inspiration of where, okay, where's the learning curve going to be? What kind of tool tips do we need to put in the HUD, or kind of what visuals should we put together to try to smooth out that learning curve or address those questions that naturally just came in chat. We show somebody just a screenshot of a HUD and it's like, well, what does that do? It's like, okay, well, it's not obvious what that does. So is it obvious as soon as you interact with it? Should we put more effort into there? Bloodshot says, can we add another use for Crystal Crucible? Currently it has no use given the drop by the bosses. Yeah, for sure. That's kind of something on our radar as well. Popular suggestion is just kind of finding new uses for older items. Any idea for reruns of old events, like a bit of nostalgia for older players? I don't know if we could kind of casually just kind of throw that up for a bit and then pull it back down. There's a surprise, even like repeating the Halloween event. It's probably takes 3-4 weeks just to kind of prep it to put it a rerun together or like run the same event a second time. So it's kind of a challenge. It's not like we have this little snapshot of the old event and we can kind of turn it on and turn it off. Somebody still has to kind of go in there and get everything working correctly. Maz as well kind of reiterates suggestion to bring back the team journals. Yeah, for sure. We've seen that feedback as well. Something I can kind of pass along to the people working on tournaments. Brendan says, have a couple friends stuck on count, don't have traps to progress through Fort Rocks, don't have the resources to farm Twisted Garden. Can be some mid-level assistance to these players. The Great Winter Hunt is kind of a time to get a little bit of a boost, but nothing has changed in that area. So the time you went through it versus they went through it, definitely kind of the climate of the game changes a little bit, and it's very natural when you're playing with other players to want to play together, right? And so in any kind of game where there's leveling, especially kind of time-gated leveling, that sort of at the more content there gets, you kind of just have to sort of squeeze down some of the early and mid game a little bit, so it's not completely unreasonable for someone to finally kind of catch up to a friend and be able to play the same level they're playing. So every now and then we try to address that a little bit, but hopefully it's not too big of a roadblock. A reduction in essence to craft. I think that would be a kind of a big scary change for Living Garden to kind of change the whole progression curve there. But something where you could unlock areas is sort of the first priority we usually give when we're looking, okay, does something need to be compressed slightly? Or is there an area in kind of the mid-early game that's kind of a roadblock preventing somebody from kind of, being able to catch up with friends in a reasonable amount of time to be able to play with them in the same level. And kind of unlocking map pieces and ranking up your hunter's title, kind of the main sort of priority things. And then as well equipment. I mean, if you arrive on the floating islands and you still have, the Ice Maiden and the Mouse Deathbot for some reason, right, there would be an issue there. So kind of ways to slot in maybe slightly more accessible traps here and there. Sejin says, can we expect event season to not change too much? Will there be a new Winter Hunt birthday? Currently, yeah, the plan is to kind of keep them all the same ones in place. And we are slowly trying to afford us the time to begin working on the next kind of major permanent adventure, next permanent area as well, and kind of keeping the events similar to how they were in the past kind of helps free up more resources to do that. As well as address some other things, like often, kind of like I touched on earlier, in the game's 10-year history, there's definitely some things that were they were programmed 10 years ago, and they kind of need somebody to go and do a little spring cleaning on that, and so the longer the game exists, kind of the more maintenance kind of starts to come into that, or the more features and areas we add to the game. Well, when they're put into the game, it isn't like they're forever done and never need to be touched again. Eventually they kind of start calling out for, I need a little maintenance, please. It's kind of like a car, you get it up and running, but then as the car gets older, it needs a little bit more maintenance than usual. Hope the golems are back for the Great Winter Hunt. Yes. So that's one other thing the team is working on right now. As I mentioned earlier, we're kind of wrapping up a follow-up patch to the floating islands that makes some HUD improvements. Also adds a 5-person variant of the Sky Pirate map, as well as looking at kind of the charm shop. We're quite ready to finalize buying Ultimate Ancient Charms from the charm shop, but I think that'll be making an appearance, and right now we're kind of workshopping as well, being able to upgrade your Ancient ultimate ancient charms into another existing charm. And then beyond that's just wrapping up, so that doesn't need a whole lot of attention. And then the team is kind of divided between working on Relic Hunter Season 8. Actually, our due date for that is today. So we're looking to wrap up all of our functionality so we can move into kind of the testing phase, the QA phase next week, and make sure to try to get all that ready to go for November 3. And then another portion of the team is working on the Great Winter Hunt. So we went up, we got the Winter Hunt restored, did a few small updates to kind of change things from 2019 into 2020, kind of putting together kind of the design documentation and stuff so the team all kind of is on the same page. We all know what we're building, that sort of thing. Right now, I believe Lauren is putting together kind of concepts for concept art for the HUD. What's going to change the narrative shift? It won't be the shorts all year mouse. Usually, how we kind of just freshen it up a little bit is add a new narrative over the same kind of game mechanic. And so the narrative's a little different this year. So she's wrapping up putting together some concept art for that. Actually, she shared that with myself and the art team yesterday, and it was looking pretty cool. A lot of whimsy as well that she came up with. So I'm kind of excited to see all that come together. But that's pretty well taking up the whole team right now. So we're split between those two projects. KNF says, I miss Halloween tourneys. Can we have those back? There should be some. Maybe they just haven't quite been scheduled yet. Bito says, what is the current direction for the game for balancing between catering towards newer players or existing higher ranked players? That's a good example of kind of where we need to juggle resources and priorities here and there. It has been a little bit unfortunate. We haven't had as much time as we would like to go and spend more time on some of the older areas and kind of new player experience, because that's good and important for the kind of overall health and longevity of the game. I think the last one we touched on was the laboratory. I think that was the last one we did, but that was quite a while ago. And I think we're at the pace of once every 2 years we start to see this little window where we can actually spend some time on that. But we're trying to put a little bit of effort, maybe seeing if there's ways to either scale up the team a little bit more to try to get more people to help us out with that stuff. But for the most part, kind of, we look at building new areas. I think we've kind of fleshed out the early and mid game quite a bit. Queso Canyon kind of helped really kind of flesh out Count a little bit more, because it was a very lacking adventures. You'd finish all the adventures, but you haven't ranked up yet, so it needed a little bit more. So we're a little bit more focused on kind of higher level areas, or kind of thinking what would come after the floating islands. But yeah, it's a tricky balance to get right. Yay, golems. Yeah, definitely everyone loves golems. Myself included. I think last year I sent most of my golems. I think I had one going to the Valor Rift nonstop, just to stockpile charms for a big prestige-based push, big Ultimate Umbra run. I wanted to stockpile on lots of powerful charms. And then also had one going to the Living Garden, which I'm a little sad. I'm in the floating islands because it's fun. I want to kind of accomplish a few things there, at least upgrade my Oculus, get all the mice. But I kind of miss the Living Garden, get back into my quest to get a whole lot of Shattered Carmine. Script says, can we get a more wintry version of the Great Winter Hunt than the more summery theme from last year? For sure, this year's narrative, I think it hits a lot of those holiday notes. Whereas last year was a little bit of a departure, a little bit different, where the antagonist was trying to melt away all the snow and turn it all into a beach resort. So this year's narrative hits on more kind of traditional holiday wintry vibes. Monica asks, new mice for Great Winter Hunt. There will be one new mouse. There's so many Great Winter Hunt mice, I don't think we need to add a whole handful of them. But we usually like to introduce a new antagonist into the storyline, and so that's a minimum one mouse. Ryan asks, can we have some updates to the goal, like Champion's Fire no longer being a hat-only loot since it's been a year already? Yeah, for sure. Every year we take a look and we refresh those drop tables, so that's good to get feedback on for sure. On the topic of feedback on Feedback Friday, that might be a good Feedback Friday to kind of pull some ideas, put up some different items, get sort of initial reaction, and what sort of rewards players would be excited about. Our goal generally with the golems is to make it so that the items they're bringing back and the rate at which you can send golems is a little bit better than if you were to spend the time actually in that area. To the point of being double, maybe even triple, depending on how many golems you have outgoing. That said, every year, kind of, incorporate feedback, refresh things. It is a challenge with more than 60 areas in the game now. Although, to be fair, one's probably the Super Brief Factory and the other one's the special event location. But, there's about 60 drop tables for the golems, right? So, if you said it takes like a week to really, focus on one, put it together, show it to people, get feedback, play test it, tweak it and stuff. That's 60 weeks, right? That's over a year of work. Now, that said, some are easier than others. Some I don't think would require a week of focused and play testing to get just right. But it is quite the daunting amount of work to put that together. So I think that's why it's kind of been nice that the golems have repeated a few years and that it can be a very iterative process to kind of fine tune that. Bloodshot says, I think the Ghost Ship scroll case this year cost too many relics. Those 2 years ago cost 4 relics, but much better rewards. Yeah, it is a bit awkward in that maps aren't a great fit for how the event works, because you hunt the event mice to get cannonballs, but then you take those cannonballs and you can fire them from anywhere in the game. So if anything, you're better off grabbing like an area-specific map. If you're sitting on a couple hundred cannonballs, or you've stockpiled your cannonballs, you're ready to start firing them, I would go to the area that you're interested in playing and just do a regular map, and that'll kind of accelerate your progress a little bit in that spot. They're a small little boost while you're in that cannonball collection phase. Von Bam says, how do we catch Mr. Rich? I don't believe anyone's quite gotten to that level 9 Oculus yet, but I think that people are narrowing in on it a little bit. Shrong says, is it possible to get a preference for map invite setting? It's really troublesome to keep changing it for every new map opened. I want mine to be friends and team only, but I might have to elaborate on that. I don't think it changes every time you open a map. Ariel says, I opened 13 Slayers at Archduke, haven't not gotten elite yet. Is it bad luck, or do you need to increase my rank? I believe that higher rank won't make it more likely to get an elite. That said, it is not the most common result of opening the Slayer, so it is kind of a rare kind of critical hit every once in a while where if you land on an elite. Colin asks, golems again for Great Winter Hunt? Yes. Toby says, randomly generated sky map at floating islands is a great feature, much more fun than repeating the same hunting day after day. Want more of randomness in new area? Yeah, that turned out really well, and I think initially when Jacob kind of pitched that concept and showed sort of a little screenshot, I think that's what kind of grabbed people's attention a little bit. At the same time, we're a little nervous, okay, this is a little bit different in the terms of the realm of usual mouse hunt gameplay and areas. It kind of piqued my interest a bit, being in playing kind of the grand strategy genre of games a lot outside mouse hunt. I was like, this has a little bit of that vibe to me, where when you look at it every time, it's a little bit different, and so your strategy needs to be a little bit different depending on the landscape put in front of you. But ultimately, I think the whole team did a great job of putting that together and getting it to a point where I think most players, the learning curve wasn't too intimidating on that. It kind of just made sense. You clicked it, highlight, and then even just when you launch and you show up, it's like, oh, okay, I get it. Those match this. All right. Swigar says, I posted this on Discord, but I think with the current Halloween trap having a new set, we could do with the old event traps that has power bonus with event charms. I think that should be the case unless we missed one. But the idea was spooky charms do work with your Halloween themed traps, so they should give a little boost, if I recall correctly. But again, off the top of my head, I could be wrong. Skylar says, my favorite cheese in real life is Munster cheese. Will ever make appearance in the game? Well, maybe. We're always looking for more types of cheese to incorporate. I know at one point in the office there was like, I don't know, somebody found it at probably a thrift shop or something, but it was a kind of the big book of cheeses. And you could just open it up and look at different types of cheese throughout the world. I felt like this seems like this is actually some important reference material for us. Cursed Diamond says Merry Munster would be cool. There you go. Alliteration usually helps push things to the top of the pile, so that would be a neat Winter Hunt sounding cheese. Shortstop says it would be cool to have a new area with a difficulty level selector so you can develop new content for all players. Very interesting in that the exact same conversation came up on the team, or like a pitch for, imagine you're going into an area and it's one that has a similar sort of feel to Floating Islands, Valor Rift, Froma Rift as well, where you kind of enter it, right? There's this phase where I'm collecting some resource, and then I do something to kind of go inside and start it. If at that moment you could choose, okay, do you want like regular mode? Do you want to face off against more difficult mice that have better drops? Or do you want to go like nightmare mode where all the mice are 10 times as strong, but all the loot drops are like multiplied by 10 as well? So, maybe you would try that when you had, okay, I have all these charms that I've been sitting on. Okay, good. I'm going to do one of these ultra rewarding but ultra challenging runs. But then when you're low on that resource, you're running out of those charms, you go, well, I'll do one of the more regular runs. Especially if the regular runs kind of rewarded some of those charms to then help you build up to eventually doing one of those ultra rewarding kind of nightmare mode runs. Jonathan says Wensleydale is my favorite cheese. Maybe we can add to this game. I have to start Googling some of these cheeses. We do kind of shy away from cheese that's named after a specific area in kind of the real world. A lot of times kind of cheese gets its name from where it is manufactured. I kind of go for more sort of, I guess not timeless is the right word, but kind of more generic or more kind of global reaching flavors of cheese. Sharon says, I think Froma Rift goals were overcorrected. Hope you guys take a look at it again. Yeah, for sure. I think that the more popular areas are the ones that we kind of do another pass on to kind of take a look at those tables again. Is there a timeline on releasing Elite Chrome maps since Elite Slayer and Relic Hunter are already available? I didn't want to do that right away because just the timing didn't quite work out where Ronza had just left. So probably the next Ronza visit that would be earmarked for, I would think. But at the moment, no specific timeline outside of that. Spagar says, it doesn't show the set is what I mean. It's just there. You mean in terms of trying to find one of your Halloween-themed traps so you know which one is going to pair well with your spooky charm? Hazard says, I am in your team and don't communicate or want to help there with maps. Yeah, I have not been too active there. Kind of tournaments aren't exactly my cup of tea. Yeah, but that's kind of the great thing about MouseHunt is that there are so many different things and different styles of areas that we can kind of curate different things to appeal to different types of players. Gene says something changed when you want to invite people to your map. When adding the hunter ID and pressing enter, you could send gifts, map invite, add as friend without entering a profile, but it's gone now. That's interesting. Let me see here. Let's take a look. It's in a book. A Reading Rainbow. All right, let me see if I can figure out what's going on here. So entering a hunter ID. Do. So let's say I search for Giorgio. Okay, so you mean here, is this where it used to allow you to send map invites and what have you? K&O says, I would love a big book of cheeses. Yonel says, I'd love that. Even though it's scary, 10 times of loot is awesome. Also, it would have to be in a specific area. I don't think we could just kind of go, okay, put MouseHunt into nightmare mode, make all the mice 10 times as strong and all the drops times 10, probably wouldn't quite work out too smoothly. But if there's an area designed with that mechanic in mind, it might be interesting. Yes, some says accepted, some doesn't, but that's where it used to be. All right, well, forgive me, whoever. I'm going to randomly put in your ID here. Okay, interesting. And you used to be able to send supplies from there. I will make a note. Live bug report and potentially confirmed. Yeah, Robotics says tournaments were a great part of the game. Lots of people love them, but now they're useless for special ones with better rewards. Definitely, I think they just need a whole overhaul. Kind of need to be kind of brought up to date, modernized, given some love. It's definitely, again, in the idea bank under that column, it just says tournament overhaul. There's a whole bunch of notes in that idea bank entry. But it just has not made its way to the top of the backlog. Grand Factor special drop or collectible, the big book of cheeses. Yeah. Whenever I open maps, it always starts as invite only for me. Okay, that's interesting. We can look into that. That might be okay timing because we're doing, we're just wrapping up the Relic Hunter. And so that's typical, our Relic Hunter Season 8 update. And that's typically when we also look at a few quality of life improvements for maps in general. This year as well, we're looking at kind of a community view or a way of doing almost kind of like matchmaking. So you can find other people that are doing a map and they have an open slot and they've requested, they're like, hey, I'm looking for people to help me with my map. Where you'll be able to kind of search out and find those people, then send them a request. Hey, I would like to join your map that you've offered to have people request an invite to. Roxanne says, hi Dave, hello, back to you. John, Platinum and Diamond tournament base, please. Yeah, I think if we ever got to overhaul tournaments, that would be in the cards for that. I would think that's definitely one of the notes in the Idea Bank entry there. It's just a matter of when the Idea Bank entry can enter the development roadmap. You've been saying that for years. Absolutely, yeah. And I'm as... not frustrated, but I find it I find it as big of a challenge as you do frustrating as well. That is almost on a daily basis my main source of stress in kind of managing the game, if you will. Is there is a billion things to do and only so much time and only so many people to help get all that done, and so. Usually at least once a week, I have a little bit of a cold sweat when I think about like, oh, okay, what are we going to do? I want to do, we want to get this done, but we also want to get this done, and we also want to get this done. And we got to pick one, but they're all pretty important. Uh-oh. It's a semi-frequent cause of stress for sure. Any plans for Halloween tournament? I'll jot that down to follow up on because I would have thought they'd been scheduled, but could have been an oversight. One of our big checklists, we incorporate it into every sort of testing, every QA phase of release. We have this checklist of like, okay, this is stuff that generally needs to at least be thought about before we kind of conclude testing and we kind of have our gold version of the release ready for to push into production. And one of those entries is create tournaments. Another one of those entries, actually, and kind of recent feedback as well, kind of makes it relevant, was add newly created mice to existing maps. So whether those are Relic Hunter maps, Slayer maps, etc. But we've changed that now, kind of based on feedback, especially in the areas where the mice are very time gated. So obviously Floating Islands is an extreme example of that, where Richard the Rich is extremely time gated. You have to level up your Oculus all the way before you can even encounter them. So we've changed that checklist item to, instead of add mice to existing maps, schedule them to be added. So we'll usually kind of fast forward a few releases into the roadmap and we'll create a task. So for example, I think Lunar New Year is when we'll add those mice back to the maps. That's they are still on the maps. When the Floating Islands patch goes out, Richard the Rich and kind of tier 2 pirates, Admiral Cloudbeard, the maritime pirate mouse, who's that the pun in that name always kind of makes me think there's a typo, but I was like, no, hold on, that's intentional. And the Scarlet Revenger, I believe, is the name of that other pirate mouse. They will no longer appear on elite maps, and I think we'll plan to add those back as part of the Lunar New Year event. Ryan says, to be honest, given how the prestige base is, surely we can have platinum base, no worries about overpowerness. For sure, it's about making it kind of an interesting journey to obtain that, and kind of like, as the way you phrased it kind of proved a point of, why would I use this thing when there's just a way better base anyway, right? So it needs kind of the right spot to be slotted in. It needs to be an interesting kind of journey, ideally anyway. Will Season 8 introduce the map sniper slot? No. So we did revise that. Part of it, again, was time constraints. It ended up, we had a very narrow window of time to work on Relic Hunter Season 8. We pretty well only had about 2, maybe 3 weeks of actually like dedicating, kind of dedicated work on it. And so that was far too ambitious of a feature. It's also something we want to make sure we have time to do due diligence and kind of design it well, where it's going to be something welcomed by all players, and we won't kind of do it in a way that's worse than the community has already done it, which have done it pretty well to begin with. So throw back to when tournament multipliers required more strategy. Yeah, for sure. And even in the initial kind of design spec when we were putting together tournaments for MouseHunt version 3 or Longtail, there were 3 game modes. There were basic or standard, which is what is currently in the game. There was, I'm trying to remember the exact terminologies. I know endurance was one. That might be the multiplier one. And then I think there was a boost one. And that one was aimed at more passive players, where every day, the tournaments would be much longer. They'd be several day-long tournaments. But almost similar to the boosted cannonball shots that you get in Halloween. Every day that you log in, you get 5 hunts that count toward, or like 5 hunts with your tournament horn. And so if you're a more passive player, every day you could log in, you could do 5 or 10 or whatever the number ended up being, hunts that actually count towards scoring points. And then the rest of the day, you're back to doing your thing. And the nice thing there is that, hey, it's not about, I think that's why the endurance, we're given the term endurance. It's not about trying to just not be offline ever, which can create all sorts of interesting side effects of people trying different means to achieve that goal. It's more about, well, I show up, I do some very important hunts, a reasonable number of hunts every day, and then I walk away, and then the rest of the hunts, I don't need to kind of lose sleep over a tournament. Can we hire Larry as a sniper? That was kind of a nice, kind gesture Michelle extended there as well. She did writing into support with one of those mice that we will soon remove from maps. She has tapped Larry on his armored shoulder and have him to go and snipe those mice. A 10-minute horns. That is a very scary change. Well, how easy it to attract Richard the Rich once you've unlocked him? Not too difficult, no. I mean, Richard the Rich is definitely, a nice little closure moment, and it's that mouse that it builds up to. But at the same time, with all that anticipation, it's not, I don't think he's the most rewarding or difficult mouse once you unlock him. I still haven't looted a jewel yet. Well, every 8 paragons, you get a jewel. Any hints on the Great Winter Hunt traps? That might be something we're looking to get suggestions on as well. Robotic Longtail Shutters. Well, the current version of the game you're playing was Longtail. That's kind of what the code name we gave that release. Gene says an app glitch during the King's giveaway. The app kept saying the event was over from the beginning. You probably need to update your app, which is a little unfortunate. That's something else, and it's not even the world's biggest project, but that is in the backlog, is to introduce a non-intrusive a reminder to update the app, especially when we put out new content. There won't be a HUD. Or maybe there's a very critical bug fix or something like that. So when you launch the app, it's tricky to get the balance right, because I feel like if it's a modal, like you're opening the app because you want to sound the horn and somebody says update the app, you're like, no, I don't want to update the app, I want to sound the horn, get out of my way, right? So it needs to just be a very subtle reminder, but not something that kind of blocks your current flow. So you choose when you want to do it, or maybe you're on mobile, you don't have unlimited data or anything like that. And so it's like, well, it's good that you let me know there's an update, but I'll do it when I'm on Wi-Fi. Every 8 paragons we get a jewel. Teach me. We can buy a jewel from the trapsmith with 8 paragon items. You also do need some glass and some ore, which makes that a little tricky to access before you fully upgraded your Oculus, because then you're kind of done with your glass and your ore, and by the time you get those 8 drops, you should have at least that much glass and ore. The adventure book gives you a jewel as well, though, which is kind of nice, and you get one, especially if you don't have the prestige base. You're looking to upgrade your base a little bit to the jewel base. You could use the jewel for that. That's it. If you have the prestige base, I probably would skip that base and come back and collect it later if you're interested in collecting. 8 paragons with balanced paragon loot at 25 oring, 1,000 or 2,500 ore and glass. Yes. Now you got me double checking here. I'm like, wait, am I so far off? But let me see here. Let me make sure I'm not completely off base. Yes, but that is important to keep in mind here. You need 2 of each items, and then you can buy a jewel. So by all means, if you're just waiting on the troves to collect, let's say 15 or 30, that's going to take a little while. So make sure you're visiting the trapsmith, but that might be something that's a little bit more accessible once you've upgraded your Oculus, because then the ore and the glass feel a little bit of a challenge until you don't have a more compelling use for them. He meant sets of 8. That's 8 paragons, right? 2. Am I crazy? You got me thinking I'm crazy here. 2, 4, 6, 8. Right? Every time you get a paragon, they're gonna drop one of those. You got to make sure you balance it out a little bit, but that's 8. Got me thinking I'm going nuts here. 2,500 of each loot is a little unrealistic when we're upgrading our Oculus. Yeah, for sure. I mean, that is one little awkward kind of hiccup in that reward structures until you upgrade your Oculus. Those jewels are they feel like they're a bit of a choice to buy them or not. But that's once you upgrade your Oculus, the ore and the glass has no other purpose outside of buying wind, more stones if you need them, as well as some charms. Dragonbane charms, kind of similar line of Mouse of Pichu. I do hope the trapsmith won't be the easiest way to get jewels. We'll kind of see, we can get feedback as well, and we'll do another follow-up milestone. But while you're going through it, you're going to get a pretty good amount from the troves. The low altitude troves have a 1% chance of obtaining a jewel, which that's pretty slim, but every 100 low altitude islands, on average, you find one of those. And the high altitude troves have a much higher chance, and they can potentially contain 2. As well as the pirate maps. Every time you finish a pirate map, you do get a jewel if you dust it. Otherwise, I think it's 50-50. If you do a non-rare map, there's only a 50% chance of getting a jewel. And Robotic, I got a jewel from a high trove. I don't think I've gotten one from a trove yet. issues we fully need for sure. I mean, the floating islands is a massive area. You almost want to think of it not in terms of a mouse hunt area as much as it's almost like it's an entire game. It's so big. I mean, maybe not big enough to be its own standalone game because definitely it benefits from feelings of bringing my equipment from other areas here to help me succeed. So it's kind of nice. It synergizes with everything. But the scope and the depth of it is large enough where it's almost like it's an entire game within the game of Mouse Hunt. So for sure, I mean, upgrading your Oculus is quite the long haul, but it is kind of almost like, beating this whole chapter of the game. It's not a small area by any stretch of the imagination. Hong says, off topic, but any discussions to implement catch rate estimate into Mouse Hunt? Yeah, that does come up, and that's in the idea bank as well. And often the greatest inspiration comes from seeing how players play the game. So even adding to kind of the mouse page's minimum luck value, because that is probably one of the more compelling uses of luck that makes it feel very different from power, is you can get 100% catch rate against a mouse with luck, whereas with power, you can. It's a little harder, but I mean, we round up. But I think we round up, I forget if it's hundredths or thousandths, so I think you need 99.991% chance to catch a mouse before power will round up to 100, and your power will never miss. That's harder to achieve typically than luck. Mechanically, it's kind of a way of, when you're high level and you go back to a low level area, high level traps typically all have a decent amount of luck where, okay, an Archduke going back to the town of Narnia won't miss any mice. Because that very early on, that was something that players never had fun. Where it's like, hey, I've gone through all these crazy quests. I'm this amazing legendary mouse hunter, or beyond legendary. I can't use that term in a generic sense. And I go back and into the meadow, and a white mouse stole my cheese. What the heck is going on here? And so luck is one of those things that say, well, as you upgrade your equipment, you reach a point where it's just, you can't miss the mice anymore. You're experienced enough. You have good enough equipment. But for sure, I mean, that's neat inspiration, and that might be neat to include right on a mouse page so you can kind of see, that's kind of what luck does for my trap beyond a small boost to loot, which is also not the most transparent thing in the world. Before Richard doesn't drop jewels. Richard isn't completely game-changing, I'll say that. That said, he's not that difficult to track down when you want to, so you can certainly face off against him many times. Yoshiro says you always need glass and ore to buy the jewel. That was the thing as well, kind of long-term stretch. You started to pile it up at an immense rate. And so for sure, kind of buying the jewels from the trapsmith is something that you really don't start to seriously look at until you've upgraded your Oculus. News for battery, if I can get them faster than I can use them. Yeah, for sure. Always a popular suggestion to find new uses for old items. Probably more likely that the TEM will get cleared up. Technical debt, yeah. It's interesting, the history of the trap effectiveness meter is it kind of started as a bug that turned into a feature. And so with that in mind, it's never quite worked right. Even this week, I was working on a couple bug fixes. One of them has to do with the prestige base not being a suggested trap because it's not aware of its increased stats. And just kind of that system is very difficult to work with some of the more newer items in the game that have their stats dynamically change on something. And so it's quite a significant challenge to get that trap effectiveness meter to kind of take into account all the same things that happen when you actually sound the horn. And, without getting kind of too technical, it comes down to encapsulation issues where the process of taking a horn or of taking a hunt or sounding the horn and taking a hunt is very much like, it's procedural. Big chunks of it anyway are very procedural. And they're not kind of encapsulated well where you can take that out and like, well, I have the same problem I need solving, but in a different context. Can I use that tool? It's like, nope, sorry, all I do is sound the horn. If you try to do that, the player will lose cheese. They'll gain points and gold and stuff. So that would be kind of top of the list of if there was some massive refactor to how you hunt for mice in the game, which is obviously a very low-level, important part of the game. it would be encapsulating those behaviors of trap equipment very well so that we could make a lot more interesting features. Why the change to team journal pages? See, this is a good sentiment of Feedback Friday, kind of assessing the mood sentiment. That's come up a number of times. So for sure, I will pass that along to the team as well and try to get clarity on why the journals are like that. And maybe we can add some sort of better privacy controls or something if the motivation's there. And on that note, an hour. Whew. We will shift over to trivia, and hopefully I don't have the answer already shown. We will see. All right. I could very well also have the answer wrong. That tends to happen quite frequently. So on the topic of Halloween, which mouse has proclaimed himself the king of Halloween? Typically, I don't know which gender the mice are, but this one proclaiming itself as king must be a male mouse. 52. The Gordborg is correct. Swift got that awfully quick. I'm impressed. I thought that would at least take somebody searching the wiki. But it looks like Swift did it from memory. Gordborg is correct. The deadly Gordborg is controlled by the self-proclaimed king of Halloween. Run for your lives. That is the description of the Gordborg. And I don't even believe it has the word mouse after it, because it's the Gordborg being piloted by whatever mouse is piloting the Gordborg. I find it funny how short the description. I did too. I get a little chuckle every now and then. I read through descriptions again as as I'm capturing mice, or I don't know. Sometimes I'm just browsing and I chuckle at the illustration. I'm like, oh, what's the description for that mouse again? There's some doozies in there. Richard the Rich got me still to this day. Like I think about that. I know Franco wrote the description. And he's like, while the rich get richer, Richard gets richest. I don't know what it was. I laughed out loud, literally. Brian, thank you very much for transcribing that link. It is in the chat for your clicking convenience. Is it intentional the Gordborg is still not catchable by a few power types? That does certainly sound like a legacy of events past. Let's check out Mr. Gordborg. Self-proclaimed king of Halloween. A lot of mice now. There are a lot of mice. Why didn't I just search for the Gordborg rather than going to the category and then using Control F in my browser? The word gourd actually appears a few times. Looks like it's missing tactical. Yeah, that's a little weird. I'll make a note of that because that's a little odd. There's probably an archaic historical reason. If I had to venture a guess, probably when that was the sort of main antagonist of the Halloween event, probably when we did the pumpkin patch themed one. Or was the corn maze, haunted house, and then you ended in the pumpkin patch. There's probably some sort of thematic power type reasoning going on there, but who knows what we were thinking many years ago. Hydrodraconic and tactical, yeah, probably in our little mouse management tool, which hopefully isn't scary to just show. Probably needs to be checked off. Let's see here. Let's see what the Gordborg is saying. The Grud. Oh, my computer doesn't like typing right now. And this tab is too small. Ooh, that's not a nice interface when you make your window narrow. Yeah, there's missing tactical, hydro, draconic, and parental. So I'll make note of that, because that's definitely a little odd. So it says, I had to switch from School of Sharks to Chrome Monstro because of that little bugger. Well, I mean, if nothing else, that does make you give a little bit used to other power types, spread the love out during the event a little bit. But yeah, it seems a little bit weird. I assume our hunters wouldn't be too opposed to that boss of years past being mildly nerfed. HD mouse images when that would be nice for sure to incorporate. Not all the mice have high resolution images, which is a bit of a challenge there. And I don't know if we could even find source files for the really old mice. Now all the high resolution paintings, those all get added into kind of source control and we don't lose track of them. But way back in the early days, even the very first version of MouseHunt did not have any source control software. It was Giorgio and I, 13 years ago, that predates GitHub even. We would be writing, and we had a coding IDE that you could share a file over the network with two cursors in it, kind of like Google document, right? Two people open up the same Google Doc and you can see each other's cursor, and we'd both be typing. Now the owner of the file was the only person who could save it, and so we happened to be sitting next to each other, and we came up with a very short bird call that you'd make when you wanted the other person to save the file. And it was caw, and the other person would go roo, and that would be the feedback, like, okay, I saved it. And then you could refresh the web server and see your change. So mildly insane, but 13 years ago, that was what we were doing. And that's why some files are kind of long gone and there was no source control. But that was remedied not too long after that, once we actually kind of started to maintain the project seriously. It used to be weak to shadow only. Okay. If I had to venture a guess, maybe it was weak to shadow and whatever power types existed at the time, because I think physical came out first, shadow came out second. I don't know if tactical was third, but yeah, I don't know. Interesting to speculate on. Exotic bird area. Yeah. Kaka and roo. Yeah, you gotta roll the R on the roo too. K&M says, love the setup save option in floating islands. Will you add that to all locations eventually? That is something we're going to get feedback on. There's some challenges with it for sure, in that as your library ages, will there be a lot of kind of demanding upkeep on it? But it's been positive feedback, so it's something on our radar, but kind of need to sort out the exact details there. Ever thought about rebanning parental into law? We'd probably just kind of phase out parental. And I was even thinking we'd do it with the floating islands, but just kind of with so much on our plate, it was kind of a race to the finish there. So we kind of chose our battles wisely. It didn't get done with floating islands, but one day I think we'll just remove parental, make the only two parental traps, kind of actually only one because you upgraded it into shadow if I recall. But just make it physical or something. I mean, no one's really going to use it outside of nostalgia, so we could probably just remove that power type. Yeah, I think it was only shadow the very first time it appeared. Okay, so I mean, I might speculate that's how it became weird. It had, because we either set it to the default, here even just for random MouseHunt trivia. This interface is awful. Let me make that bigger. There we go. Doesn't quite fit on the screen share anymore, but we either make it the default, which event mice are equally weak to all power types, or we can choose very specific sort of weaknesses. And so for whatever reason, this one mouse never got this checked. And so I wondered if, as we add a new power type, someone's like, oh, make the gourd board weak to that power type, please. Although, no, because Rift, that's weird. Yeah, I don't know. I don't even know how to speculate how that went wrong. Beats me. Please keep parental. Helps me speed up my golems with rewind charms. Well, I think you could also do that with the tacky glue trap and the wooden base as well, I would think. Save the nanny bot. Uh-oh. We're going to start much love for the old nanny bot. I would like to keep the parental. Yeah, you wouldn't lose the trap. We would just change the power type on it. So just so that forever in the game there isn't the reference of the parental. And it's kind of an artifact of the second birthday event. Wow, just think of how long ago that was. 11 years ago. The Terrible Twos mouse. It felt a little uncomfortable that, obviously, all the mice are personified, but that one was personified as a child, and it just felt a little weird to go and get your death bot with very sort of crude-looking weaponry on it and capture a sort of childlike mouse. Didn't quite sit right, so we came up with the whimsy of well, no, you get this like robotic nanny to capture the mouse. But then kind of, the suspension of disbelief over the years. Maybe that mouse is all grown up. It's nefarious now. It's a villain. And doesn't quite have the same connotations, I guess. There you go. Ben says, use the steam laser Mach 2 broken for golems. That is a niche use for that trap if I ever heard it. Jinx. All right, well, I will wrap things up. Hunters, thank you for the feedback. And again, we try to touch on the main topic of what do you enjoy about Feedback Friday. In a lot of regards, kind of seeing the questions and the topics that come up in chat when it is just kind of open Q&A is kind of revealing to what hunters are looking to get out of the chat, at least the group of hunters that joined me today. So I will take that with a grain of salt as well, and kind of put that into thought of future Feedback Fridays as we try to think about how can we improve the format and the process as the years go on. Goodbye, Dave. Goodbye. Thanks. You are welcome. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for all the feedback, all your comments. It'll most likely be Jacob next week, I think, but we'll see. So thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time, hunters.
1, 2.
You're a trap. Don't seem to mind it. You attract me. I'm a mouse, you're a cat. I don't seem to mind it. Soft and furry. Oh, and just when I think I'm safe, snap. Turns out I'm never safe, snap. Just when you think you're safe, snap. I come back. You don't seem to mind it, but I'm a fool. Broke my back. You don't seem to mind it, 'cause you're so cool. And just when I think I'm safe, snap. Turns out I'm never safe, snap. Ooh. And just when you think you're safe, snap.